March 1962. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff signs his name to a plan to kill Americans on purpose, and one line, buried near the end of this file, still has no official explanation. The archive is open. Tonight's file is top secret, marked no foreign, and it was written by the United States military about its own country. March 13, 1962. The memo goes to the Secretary of Defense, signed by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff himself. Straight from the folder.
1. The Joint Chiefs of Staff have considered the attached memorandum for the Chief of Operations Cuba project, which responds to a request of that office for brief but precise description of pretexts which would provide justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba.
Pretexts, not intelligence, not warnings. Pretexts, reasons to invade, invented on purpose. A few pages in, the chiefs even decide who gets to run it.
It is recommended that this responsibility for both overt and covert military operations be assigned the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
That's the mission. Here's the deadline. The field office wanted the chiefs on record fast. 1 week, no room to negotiate.
The Chief of Operations Cuba project has requested that he be furnished the views of the Joint Chiefs of Staff on this matter by 13th March 1962.
So they hit the deadline exactly. And when they answer, they don't just approve the plan, they build in deniability from the very first line. Page 7 picks up right where the request left off. The document that requested all this has a name worth remembering: Operation Mongoose. Read it.
Memorandum for General Craig from Chief of Operations Cuba project, subject Operation Mongoose, dated 5 March 1962, on file in General Craig's office.
The chiefs don't just say yes. They say yes, and then they quietly decide who else doesn't get to see this. One recommendation, tucked at the bottom of page 6, is about controlling the paper trail itself.
B. This paper not be forwarded to commanders of unified or specified commands.
Keep it out of the field, keep it off the record, and keep the clock running, because on page 6, they even explain why the timing matters. Same page, one line down. The chiefs don't just recommend the plan move forward, they spell out exactly what it needs to accomplish. Read the objective.
Such a plan would enable a logical buildup of incidents to be combined with other seemingly unrelated events to
Camouflage. The word cuts off mid-sentence. The page ends right there. But turn it over, and the plan gets a deadline of its own. Page 9 finishes the thought the camouflage line started, and it doesn't slow down for ethics. It speeds up for scheduling.
Time is an important factor in resolution of the Cuban problem. Therefore, the plan should be so time-phased that projects would be operable within the next few months.
Months. Not years, not decades. Months. And once the timeline's set, the file stops talking in generalities. Page 10 gives the whole scheme a title. Chapter 1 closes with the clock. Why the rush? Because the window for Cuba to have Soviet cover was closing, and Washington knew it. But staged attacks alone don't start a war. You need a document trail that survives scrutiny, an actual chain of command signing off. This is the memo that sent Guantanamo up the ladder in the first place.
Justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba, TS. The Joint Chiefs of Staff are to indicate brief but precise description of pretexts which they consider would provide justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. Cognizance has been taken of a suggested course of action proposed by the U.S. Navy relating to generated instances in the Guantanamo area.
So where do you stage a war nobody can trace back to you? A U.S. naval base surrounded by Cuban soil, Guantanamo. Straight from the folder.
A series of well-coordinated incidents will be planned to take place in and around Guantanamo to give genuine appearance of being done by hostile Cuban forces.
11 separate fake attacks, riots, sabotage, mortar fire, staged by American hands, blamed on Cuba. Overt and covert, same signature. That's not oversight. That's a monopoly on the story before a single shot gets fired. Camouflage, a buildup of incidents inside a wave of unrelated ones. Page 8 spells out the method before the 11 scenarios ever get written. An 8-day turnaround, and when the answer came back, it didn't hedge. It named who should run the whole intervention, overt and covert, permanently. Item 11 is worse. Sink a ship and hold funerals for people who never existed. We'll come back to that instinct. Dead sailors as props.
10. Sabotage ship in harbor. Large fires, naphthalene. 11. Sink ship near harbor entrance. Conduct funerals for mock victims, maybe lieu of 10.
Now the name that gives this file its ghost. 1898, USS Maine. The plan literally invokes the excuse that started the Spanish-American War.
3. A Remember the Maine incident could be arranged in several forms. A. We could blow up a U.S. ship in Guantanamo Bay and blame Cuba.
Option B is colder. A drone ship near Havana, real casualty lists printed in American newspapers for people who don't exist, straight from the folder. Hold that thought. The drone ship gets its own page in a moment. First, the paper trail that kept all of this invisible. There's a footnote to who saw this. Page 8, recommendation section. The Joint Chiefs explicitly restrict its distribution. This plan was built to stay invisible, even inside the military.
It is recommended that A. Enclosure A, together with its attachments, should be forwarded to the Secretary of Defense for approval and transmittal to the Chief of Operations, Cuba Project. B. This paper not be forwarded to commanders of unified or specified commands.
One office writes it, one office approves it. Everyone else stays blind. That's not standard staffing procedure. That's containment. Mongoose, the covert campaign against Castro, and the parent of everything we've just read. And look what the Joint Chiefs volunteer for next. Not just planning, command of the whole operation. Page 5 spells out the goal in plain language. Not victory, optics. Make Cuba look like the aggressor and let world opinion do the rest.
The U.S. could follow up with an air-sea rescue operation covered by U.S. fighters to evacuate remaining members of the non-existent crew. Casualty lists in U.S. newspapers would cause a helpful wave of national indignation.
Terror doesn't stay offshore in this plan. Point 4 moves it to Florida, to Washington. Read it.
4. We could develop a communist Cuban terror campaign in the Miami area, in other Florida cities, and even in Washington. We could sink a boatload of Cubans en route to Florida, real or simulated.
Whatever the redaction hides on this next page, deeper in the file, it cost taxpayers something to keep secret this long, but the plain plan doesn't need redacting to be disturbing.
8. It is possible to create an incident which will demonstrate convincingly that a Cuban aircraft has attacked and shot down a chartered civil airliner en route from the United States to Jamaica, Guatemala, Panama, or Venezuela.
That memo didn't leak into existence on its own. Page 5 spells out the actual goal. Not defense, image management, manufacturing the villain world opinion would accept.
World opinion and the United Nations Forum should be favorably affected by developing the international image of the Cuban government as rash and irresponsible, and as an alarming and unpredictable threat to the peace of the West.
The recommendation section is colder than the plan itself, and before we're done, we'll read the full distribution blacklist, name by name. So the plan gets buried from the field commanders, but someone still has to run it. Page 7 names the agency handed both the overt and covert side of the operation. That footnote at the bottom of the page names the request that started all of this, not a rogue idea, a formal ask filed under a code name. Operation Mongoose. College students, on vacation. That's the passenger list they picked to make the outrage land harder. Not the CIA, not state. The Joint Chiefs asked to run both the visible war and the invisible one out of the same office. World opinion. That phrase does a lot of work in this file. The goal wasn't just intervention. It was making Cuba look like the aggressor first.
The passengers could be a group of college students off on a holiday, or any grouping of persons with a common interest to support chartering a non-scheduled flight.
Here's the mechanism. A duplicate aircraft at Eglin Air Force Base, real passengers swapped out. Then the real plane, now empty, keeps flying as a drone toward Cuba. 8 days. That's the window between request and full pretext plan for military intervention. This wasn't deliberation. It was assembly line paperwork with a clock running.
A. An aircraft at Eglin AFB would be painted and numbered as an exact duplicate for a civil registered aircraft belonging to a CIA proprietary organization in the Miami area. At a designated time, the duplicate would be substituted for the actual civil aircraft and would be loaded with the selected passengers, all boarded under carefully prepared aliases.
What you're about to hear stayed classified for over 30 years. This is a real pilot ordered to vanish in a plan the U.S. government signed. Listen.
The aircraft would be met by the proper people, quickly stored and given a new tail number. The pilot who had performed the mission under an alias would resume his proper identity and return to his normal place of business. The pilot and aircraft would then have disappeared.
Read that sentence again in your head. The pilot and aircraft would then have disappeared. Written down, filed, signed off. That's the disappearance the cold open promised, a sentence nobody in the government has ever had to explain because the war it was built for never happened. The MiG plan is its twin. Paint an American F-101 to look shot down, fake a distress call, then scatter wreckage off the Cuban coast from a submarine. Straight from the folder.
C. At precisely the same time that the aircraft was presumably shot down, a submarine or small surface craft would disperse F-101 parts, parachute, etc. at approximately 15 to 20 miles off the Cuban coast and depart.
Recommendation section. Near the memo's start, this paper was never meant to reach NATO officers, unified commanders, or the UN delegation. It was built to stay inside a very small room.
B. This paper not be forwarded to commanders of unified or specified commands. C. This paper not be forwarded to U.S. officers assigned to NATO activities. D. This paper not be forwarded to the chairman, U.S. Delegation, United Nations Military Staff Committee.
President Kennedy rejected Northwoods. It never left the planning stage, but the men who wrote it kept their jobs, and their names are on public paper today. One agency, one recommendation, buried in a footnote. Everything that follows in this file, the drone planes, the fake wreckage, the disappearing pilot, traces back to that single dated request. The file is public because the JFK Assassination Records Act forced it out in 1997. 35 years buried, stamped systematically reviewed, still marked no foreign when it finally surfaced. Every file we read tonight is linked below. Don't take our word for it. Read them yourself. And if you want the next file on your desk, subscribe. New files every Tuesday and Friday.